The third rail I am replacing at 3:22 in the morning in the B Division tunnel between DeKalb Avenue and Atlantic Terminal has been dead for 4 hours and will be dead for 2 more. And in those 2 more hours, I am the only thing in this tunnel that is not supposed to be here, and that is also not a rat. And I want to be precise about that distinction because the rats in this tunnel, which are present and numerous, and which I have stopped registering consciously the way you stop registering any constant of an environment you have worked in long enough. The rats at least belong here in the sense that they have been here longer than the subway has been here, and will be here after the subway is gone. And their presence in this tunnel at 3:22 in the morning is not the presence that is making the hair on the back of my neck behave the way it has been behaving for the last 26 minutes, which is the specific behavior of hair that belongs to a nervous system that is receiving information about the environment that it is processing faster than the conscious mind can catch up to. Information that my body has already evaluated and rendered a judgment on while my mind is still running through the list of explanations and finding the list shorter than it needs to be. I want to tell you about this job with the honesty of someone who has done it for 11 years and who has long since passed through the phase where the honesty requires courage, who has reached the phase where the honesty is simply the most efficient way to convey what the experience is, because the experience is specific enough that approximation loses too much. I am a track worker, level 3, employed by the Metropolitan Transportation Authority of New York City, assigned to the overnight maintenance division that operates in the subway tunnels during the hours when train service is suspended, which on most nights is between approximately 1 in the morning and 5 in the morning. A 4-hour window that is the only window in which the track can be accessed without the immediate and lethal problem of live third rail and moving trains, which are the two conditions of the subway system during operating hours that make track work during those hours something that is not done, something that does not happen, something that the workers who do this job overnight understand as the hard physical boundary of their working world, the border between the hours when the tunnel is a workplace and the hours when the tunnel is a place where a person dies. The window opens at 1 and closes at 5, and inside the window we work, and outside the window we are not in the tunnel, and the discipline of that understanding is absolute because the discipline of that understanding is what keeps us alive. The New York City subway tunnel at 3 in the morning is an environment that I have spent 11 years developing an intimate and specific knowledge of its smells and its sounds, and its physical character at different points and different depths and different sections of the system, which is a system of extraordinary complexity and age. Tunnels built over a period of more than a century using different methods and different materials and different engineering philosophies, layered on top of each other and alongside each other in a geological and infrastructural complexity that even the people who maintain it do not fully comprehend, because no single person can hold the complete picture of 245 miles of routes and 472 stations, and the tunnels connecting them. What I know is the sections I have worked, the specific tunnels with their specific characters, and what I know of those tunnels is more than most people know of any place they have spent time in. Because knowing a tunnel the way a track worker knows it is a different quality of knowing than the knowing of a commuter or a tourist or anyone who passes through it in a lit train at speed. I know the tunnels from inside them, on foot, in the dark that is not complete dark because the work lights and the headlamp and the occasional emergency lighting of the tunnel exist. But that is a dark relative to the surface world, a dim, an enclosed dark that smells of ozone and machine oil and the specific earthen smell of old concrete and stone that has been underground for 100 years, and under all of it the smell of rats, which is not what you might imagine, which is not a sharp or particularly unpleasant smell in isolation, but which in combination with everything else becomes the smell of the tunnel, the way the smell of salt water becomes the smell of the ocean, inseparable from the thing itself. The third rail runs the length of the tunnel on the right side of the track, approximately a foot outside the running rail, at a height of approximately 8 inches above the ballast, and it carries 625 volts of direct current during operating hours, which is the voltage that kills a person in under a second if contact is made, which is why the work window exists, which is why the 4 hours between 1 and 5 are the hours in which the rail can be touched, can be handled, can be replaced when sections fail or degrade beyond safe specification. Replacing a section of third rail is a physical job that requires a crew, which tonight is me and 3 other workers, my foreman whose name is Guillermo, and who has been doing this work for 19 years, and who is at the far end of the replacement section managing the new rail placement, and 2 other workers named Tors, and a man everyone calls Beef, who is handling the bonding connections at the near end of the section. I am in the middle, removing the fasteners from the old rail section and preparing the mounting hardware for the new installation, and I am alone in my section of the tunnel in the way that track work distributes a crew across a working distance. Alone in the specific sense that the nearest person is 40 feet away, and the work environment means that 40 feet is a separation across which normal speech does not reliably carry. The unwritten rules of overnight subway track work are not unwritten because they are secret, but because they are the kind of knowledge that cannot be written in a way that conveys its weight, that requires the context of the environment to be understood in the way the workers who follow them understand them. The first is the window rule I have already described, which is absolute and which has no exceptions. The second is the communication rule, which is that you maintain voice or radio contact with at least one other crew member at all times, not because the tunnel is a dangerous place in the sense of structural danger, which it is not in any active way on a maintained section, but because the tunnel is a place where disorientation occurs, where the sameness of the visual environment and the acoustic properties of the enclosed space and the absence of the ordinary navigational cues of the surface world combine to produce, in workers who are not vigilant about maintaining their spatial orientation, a state of uncertainty about where they are in the tunnel that is not full disorientation, but is the precursor to it. And the precursor state is the state you want to correct before it progresses, which is what the communication rule is for. The third rule, the one delivered last and most quietly by every veteran to every new worker, is this. In the tunnel, you do not follow sounds that you cannot account for. You hear something you cannot account for, you account for it using your radio and your crew, you establish what it is through communication and cross-reference, and if you cannot establish what it is, you do not move toward it. You hold your position. You tell your foreman. You do not follow. The sound I am hearing at 3:22 has been present for 26 minutes, and I have not yet told Guillermo, which is a violation of the third rule and which I am aware of as a violation, and which I have been committing because, for the first 18 of those 26 minutes, I was applying the explanation framework that the tunnel provides, the list of known tunnel sounds and their sources, to what I was hearing, and the framework was taking longer than usual to produce a match. And I kept extending the application period because the alternative to explaining it was reporting it. And reporting it means stopping work, means potentially losing time in the window, means the kind of scrutiny that a worker gets when he reports something to Guillermo that Guillermo's 19 years has not prepared him for. The framework has now produced no match in 26 minutes, and I am no longer extending the application period. The known sounds of the subway tunnel at 3 in the morning are a comprehensive set. The tunnel breathes, which is the technical description of the air movement that the tunnel system produces through its ventilation infrastructure. A slow exchange of air between the tunnel environment and the surface that produces a continuous low movement of air, felt on the face and in the ears as a light pressure variation, heard as a very low frequency sound that is below the threshold of normal conscious hearing, but that long-term tunnel workers register physically and unconsciously. The tunnel settles, which is the sound of the infrastructure itself, the concrete and the steel and the track hardware, undergoing the micro-movements of thermal expansion and contraction, and the vibration transmission from surface traffic, producing a range of ticks and creaks and occasional low groans that are the voices of old materials under continuous load. The rats move, which is a sound that ranges from the rustle of rat passage along the sides of the tunnel to the specific sharp sound of rat claws on the steel running rail, a sound that is distinctive and unambiguous once you have heard it enough times. The water drips because the subway tunnel is in constant negotiation with the groundwater above and around it, a negotiation that produces drips and trickles and occasional slow flows at specific points in every tunnel section, points that the maintenance logs track and that I know by their locations in my working sections. These are the sounds. This is the full set. What I am hearing at 3:22 is not in the set. It is behind me. Not far behind me, not at the distance that would indicate a sound source at the end of the tunnel or at a station platform. Close behind me, at a distance that I would estimate at 20 to 30 feet, which is the distance between my working position and the point where the active section of the tunnel curves slightly to the south. A curve that takes it out of the line of sight from my position in a way that is not a blind corner exactly, but is a limit of visibility that I am aware of in the way that tunnel workers are aware of visibility limits, as the boundary of what the headlamp can confirm and what it cannot. The sound is periodic. It comes at intervals of approximately 45 seconds, lasting 3 to 5 seconds each instance, and it is a mechanical sound in character, meaning it has the quality of metal or hard material in contact with another surface. But it is not the specific quality of any of the mechanical sounds I know from this tunnel or any tunnel I have worked, and the periodicity of it, the regularity of the 45-second interval, is the quality that has produced the behavior in the hair on the back of my neck, because random tunnel sounds are not periodic, are not regular, do not come at intervals, and periodic regularity is the signature of something that is producing the sound intentionally, something that is doing something at a regular interval, something that is in the tunnel behind me past the curve of the tunnel wall, in the dark that my headlamp does not reach. I key my radio at 3:23. I call Guillermo. He answers in 2 seconds, the 2-second delay of someone who has been working with his hands and has to locate and key his own radio, and I tell him I am hearing a periodic sound from behind my position, past the south curve, source unknown, requesting guidance. There is a longer pause, not the pause of radio delay, the pause of a person processing information and formulating a response that contains what it needs to contain. Guillermo says, "What kind of periodic?" I describe it. The interval, the duration, the character. Another pause. Guillermo says, "Tors, what is your position?" Tors' voice comes on. He is at the far bonding position, forward of me in the tunnel, not behind. Guillermo says, "Beef." Beef's voice, he is also forward near Tors. Guillermo says to me, "Hold position, do not advance toward the sound, I am coming to your position." I say, "Copy." I hold. Guillermo arrives at my position in 4 minutes. He is a large man, and he moves through tunnels with the specific efficiency of 19 years, the movement of someone for whom the tunnel's physical constraints are as familiar as the furniture of a room he has lived in for a long time. He stands beside me and I show him the direction of the sound and we wait together. And at the 45-second mark the sound occurs and Guillermo stands very still while it occurs and it lasts 4 seconds and stops. And Guillermo is quiet for a moment after it stops and then he says, "When did this start?" I say, "Approximately 26 minutes before I called you." He nods. He looks at the south curve. He looks at his watch. He says, "We have 2 hours and 11 minutes in the window." He says, "We are going to complete this installation and we are going to take the most direct exit path to the Atlantic Terminal platform when the work is done, and we are not going to walk past the south curve tonight." I say, "What's past the south curve?" He looks at me with the look of a man who has decided what to include and what to leave out. He says, "I have heard this sound twice in 19 years. Both times in this section. Both times between 3 and 4 a.m. I say, "And?" He says the first time the worker who went to investigate the sound did not see anything. He took 3 weeks of leave after that section assignment, and when he came back he requested permanent transfer to a different division. I say, "And the second time?" Guillermo looks at the south curve again. He says, "The second time I was the one who almost went to investigate." He says, "Almost." I say, "What stopped you?" He says, "The same thing that should have stopped him, which is the third rule, which exists because something in this tunnel between DeKalb and Atlantic Terminal makes that sound between 3 and 4 a.m. and has made it since before my 19 years and before the career of the man I learned the third rule from, and the rule is the rule. And the rule says you do not follow sounds you cannot account for." I say, "What is it?" He says, "I don't know what it is. I know where it isn't, which is anywhere that I can see, and I know that it knows we're here, which is why it's still making the sound, and I know that what it wants is for one of us to walk around that curve, and I know that neither of us is going to do that." He picks up his tools. He says, 2 hours 9 minutes. Let's finish the rail. We finish the rail. All 4 of us, working at a pace that Guillermo sets, and that is faster than our standard pace without being rushed. The pace of professionals completing a job with a clear awareness of the time available for it. The sound comes 6 more times at its 45-second interval while we work. On the 4th instance it is closer, meaning the source has moved from past the south curve to approximately the south curve itself, to the limit of the visible tunnel behind us. And Guillermo notes the change and does not alter his pace and does not look up from his work, and I take the cue and do not look up from mine. On the 6th instance the sound is at its original distance again, past the curve, back to where it started, and after the 6th instance it does not come again, and the silence where the 45-second interval should produce the 7th instance is the loudest silence I have experienced in 11 years of tunnel work. We exit via Atlantic Terminal at 5:03, 2 minutes after the window closes. The platform is empty at that hour, the station not yet staffed, and we walk through it with the specific physical relief of tunnel workers reaching a platform. The relief of the ceiling being high enough to stand fully upright in, the relief of the tile and the lights and the bench and the map on the wall, all the ordinary furniture of a subway station that is the furniture of the human world and not the tunnel world. Guillermo does not debrief the night beyond logging the rail replacement as complete and the section as clear. He does not log the sound. I do not log the sound. There is no field in the maintenance log for sounds past the south curve between 3 and 4 a.m., and there is no field in any log I have access to for the question that I have been carrying since that night and carrying still. which is the question of what it wants when it moves from past the curve to the curve itself, and then back, what the approach and retreat is the behavior of. What kind of thing in a 100-year-old subway tunnel between DeKalb and Atlantic Terminal makes a periodic mechanical sound between 3 and 4 a.m. and knows when the crew in its tunnel is moving away, and moves toward them and knows when they are not going to come and retreats back to its position? Because the knowing, the knowledge that whatever makes the sound has about the crew in its tunnel, and about their intentions, and about the window, and about the third rule, is the thing that has no place in any of the frameworks I use for understanding the tunnel, and that I carry home in the early morning through the subway that I take to get home, and that I sit in as a passenger, and watch the tunnel walls passing in the lit windows, and think about the curve past the south wall, and what is on the other side of it. What has been on the other side of it since before the 19 years of Guillermo's career? What was on the other side of it when the tunnel was built? What was in the earth when the earth was opened? And what has been making its periodic sound in the dark since the dark was enclosed around it, waiting for someone to follow it, patient in the specific way of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has no particular deadline? Story number 2. The marking on the drainage tunnel wall at 203 feet below the surface of Wisconsin is not the marking of any tool in the inventory of this project, and is not the marking of any geological process I have studied in 12 years of underground infrastructure work, and is not the marking of any of the 51 workers who have had access to this drainage section in the 8 months since the boring machine first opened this level. And I know all of these things with a certainty that is professional and specific, and that has been accumulating across the 3 weeks during which the markings have been appearing, growing in number and in complexity, now covering a section of the east drainage gallery wall that is 11 feet long and 4 feet high, with a density and organization that has moved, in my assessment of it, from anomaly to system, from random to language. And I am 203 feet underground in a drainage gallery that smells of wet limestone and machine oil, and the cold mineral water that seeps through the karst above us. And I am standing in front of 11 feet of wall that is talking to me in a language I cannot read, and I have not told anyone about the markings, and I am going to have to decide soon whether that was a decision or a failure. I am a maintenance technician on the Kettle Moraine Deep Tunnel project in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, a water infrastructure project of the type that urban and suburban areas undertake when their surface water management systems reach the limit of their capacity, which this region's did, and which the solution to is a deep tunnel, a large diameter tunnel bored through the bedrock at significant depth to provide storage and conveyance capacity for stormwater that the surface system cannot handle. The Kettle Moraine project is a 5-mile tunnel bored through Silurian dolomite and limestone at a depth ranging from 150 to 220 feet below the surface, served by 4 access shafts, and equipped with a drainage and pump system that manages the groundwater infiltration that is a constant condition of any tunnel bored through karst geology, which is the geology of this region. A geology of dissolved limestone and underground voids, and the groundwater movement that both produces those voids and moves through them in ways that make every karst tunnel project a negotiation with water rather than a management of it, a negotiation that the drainage system I maintain is the primary instrument of. My job is to ensure that the drainage system functions, which means inspecting the drainage galleries that collect the seepage water and direct it to the pump sumps, inspecting the pumps themselves, managing the discharge system, and identifying any changes in the infiltration pattern that might indicate a developing problem in the tunnel structure or the surrounding geology. I do this work alone on the night shift because the night shift is when the boring machine and the primary construction crews are paused for maintenance, when the tunnel population is reduced to the minimum skeleton crew necessary to maintain site safety and drainage, and when the drainage galleries are accessible without the obstruction of construction traffic. I have access to the full drainage network, which includes the main tunnel drainage channels and 8 smaller collector galleries branching off the main tunnel at intervals. Galleries that are smaller than the main bore, roughly 6 feet in diameter, lit by a single string of temporary lighting that runs the length of each gallery, and that produces enough illumination to work in and not enough to make the work comfortable. The East Drainage Gallery, which is Gallery 4 in the project numbering, is the longest of the 8 collector galleries, running approximately 240 feet from the main tunnel bore into the limestone to the east, collecting groundwater seepage from a section of karst that the project geological assessment described as moderately active, meaning the water movement through the rock is neither negligible nor extreme, meaning the drainage system is doing real work in this section. It is the gallery I check most frequently because it is the gallery that requires the most attention from a drainage management perspective, and it is therefore the gallery in which I have spent the most time in the 8 months of this project, and it is therefore the gallery in which I noticed first the marking. The first marking was not remarkable in itself, which is why I did not log it when I first saw it. It was in the 4th week of the project, approximately at the 150-foot mark of Gallery 4, a mark on the east wall of the gallery approximately at chest height, a linear incision in the limestone approximately 4 inches long, clean-edged, straight, with the character of a cut rather than a scratch, the character of something made by a hard edge drawn across the surface with deliberate controlled pressure. I noted it in the way you note the small anomalies of a rock surface in a working tunnel environment, filed it under the category of construction artifact, a mark left by equipment or material contact during boring or installation, and moved past it. In the 8th week, I noticed it again and noticed 3 additional marks near it, 2 parallel linear incisions, and a curved mark that I would describe as an arc, approximately 3 inches in radius, positioned adjacent to the original linear mark in a way that suggested spatial relationship between them, and I photographed them and moved past them again with the note of follow-up required, and did not follow up for another week, which is the time management of a maintenance technician managing 8 drainage galleries and 4 pump sumps on an overnight shift, the compression of available attention across a work scope that is too large for the attention available. The follow-up, when I returned to the 150-foot mark of Gallery for 3 weeks after the first observation, produced the thing that moved the markings from anomaly to concern, which was the discovery that the section of wall bearing the markings had grown from 5 marks in an area of approximately 1 square foot to a section of wall covering approximately 3 linear feet and 2 feet of height with marks of multiple types: linear, curved, circular, angular, distributed across the surface in a density that had not been there 3 weeks before, and distributed with a relationship to each other that was not random, that had the character of marks that are related to other marks, that are positioned with reference to other marks, that are part of a system that has an internal logic, and the internal logic was not visible to me in that first full observation, but was something I felt the presence of before I could articulate it, the presence of organization, of a pattern that was larger than the individual marks, and that required the full section of wall to be visible simultaneously to apprehend. I began photographing the full section. I came back every 3 nights and photographed the full section, and the section grew. In 3 weeks, it grew from 3 linear feet to 11 linear feet, and from 2 feet of height to 4 feet of height, and the density of marks within the section increased, and the complexity of the spatial relationships between marks increased. And I looked at the photographs on my phone between gallery checks, and I looked at them at home after my shift, and I looked at them with the specific attention of someone trying to read something in a script they do not know, trying to find the units of meaning, the repeating elements, the structural grammar, and finding them, finding the elements that appear multiple times in different positions within the section, finding the structural relationships between those repeating elements, finding something that behaved in the photographs I had taken over 3 weeks, like writing, not writing in any script I could identify, not any character system I could match against anything in my knowledge of written languages or symbolic systems or geological notation or engineering marking conventions or any other system of marks I had encountered in 12 years of underground work. Something that was its own system, that had its own units and its own grammar, that had been placed on the east wall of Gallery 4 at 203 feet below the surface of Wisconsin, beginning at some point before my first observation in the 4th week of the project, and growing across 8 weeks in a direction that was consistent, that moved consistently from the 150-foot mark toward the end of the gallery at 240 feet, growing in the direction of depth, adding new marks at the deeper end of the section, while the marks at the shallower end remained unchanged, as if the text was being written in a direction and the writing was in progress, was ongoing, was being added to between my observations at a pace that the 3-week observation record documented. I go to the end of the section at the beginning of every check now. I photograph the newest marks before I do anything else in this gallery. I have been doing this for 3 weeks since the realization that the section was actively growing, and in 3 weeks the section has extended from 11 feet to 14 feet, and is now approaching the pump sump at the end of the gallery, approaching the piece of equipment that is the operational heart of this gallery, the pump that keeps this section of the tunnel drained, the pump that, if it fails, will allow the east karst seepage to accumulate and potentially to undermine the drainage system's capacity for this section of the main bore. The marks are approaching the sump. The marks are moving toward the thing that matters most in this gallery, and I have not told anyone. I have not told anyone because the telling requires a description of what I have observed, and the description invites a set of responses that range from "you need more sleep" to "we need to get the geologist out here." And the geological response is the one I am most concerned about, because the geological response would produce an investigation, which would produce a finding, which would have one of 2 outcomes. The finding that the marks are a geological phenomenon, which is the finding that I have already eliminated in my own assessment based on 12 years of experience with limestone surfaces and the character of geological marks versus made marks, or the finding that the marks were made by a person, which would produce a forensic investigation of who made the marks, and when and how they accessed the gallery without being logged, which is a question with no good answer, because the access log for Gallery 4 shows 11 authorized entries in the period during which the marks appeared, all logged, all mine, no other authorized entries, no unauthorized entries detected by the access monitoring system, no evidence of any person having been in Gallery 4 except me. I am standing at the current end of the mark section at 2:07 in the morning at a depth of 203 feet, looking at the newest marks, the marks that were not present when I photographed this section 3 nights ago. And the newest marks are different from the previous marks in one specific way that I noticed when I arrived, and that I am still processing as I stand here with my headlamp and my camera. The previous marks are all at the same height on the wall, a consistent band from approximately 3 feet above the gallery floor to approximately 5 feet above the gallery floor, which is the band that corresponds to the height range of an adult human standing or kneeling in a 6-foot gallery. The newest marks extend below the previous lower boundary, below 3 feet, going down to the gallery floor, and the marks below 3 feet are different in character from the marks above. Not the incised cuts of the upper section, but something pressed into the limestone surface, something that has left a physical impression in the limestone rather than a removal from it. And limestone is a soft rock relative to most, but it is not a rock that yields to hand pressure, not a rock that takes impressions easily. And what has pressed these marks into the limestone at and below floor level has done so with a force that the material requires, and that I do not want to calculate in terms of what produces it. I photograph everything. I stand in Gallery 4 at 2:07 in the morning, and I take 43 photographs, and I look at the marks, and I look at the pump sump 6 feet ahead of me where the gallery ends and where the marks are going, and I look at the floor of the gallery where the newest marks press into the surface, and I listen to the gallery. The gallery has sounds. The drainage water moving through the channels, the pump cycling at its automated interval, the drip of seepage from the ceiling at the 2 specific points in this gallery where the karst above is particularly active tonight. These are the sounds of Gallery 4 that I know from 8 months of checks. Tonight there is an additional sound, not loud, not dramatic. A low sound from the rock itself, from the limestone walls. A vibration in the material of the wall that is not the vibration of the pump, which I know and can feel in the floor as a separate thing, but a vibration in the wall material that I feel when I put my hand flat on the surface below the marks, in the area of the pressed impressions, and that my hand pressed flat on the cold, wet limestone can feel as clearly as I feel the pump vibration in the floor, a slow, rhythmic vibration in the rock. Coming from the other side of the wall, from the limestone on the far side of a wall that is solid, that the project bore logs show as having no void or gallery on the other side of it for at least 80 feet, that should be producing no vibration from no source, and that is vibrating, slowly, rhythmically, at the frequency of something very large and very slow moving through solid rock with an ease that solid rock is not supposed to permit. I take my hand off the wall. I complete my gallery check. I inspect the pump. I check the drainage channel. I log the pump status and the drainage flow rate, and the visual inspection result as no issues found. Drainage normal, pump functioning within parameters. I do not log the marks. I do not log the vibration. I walk back through Gallery 4 to the main tunnel, and I complete my remaining gallery checks and my pump sump inspections, and I return to the surface at 5:14 in the morning, and I sit in my truck in the project parking lot in the Wisconsin Prud'Homme, and I look at the 43 photographs on my phone, and I look at the marks in the photographs, and I think about what is on the other side of the Gallery 4 east wall. What is moving through 80 feet of solid limestone at the frequency and the scale that the vibration in the wall suggests, and what it is writing on the inside of the wall that faces the gallery, what it is putting there for the person who comes every 3 nights to photograph it, what the progression of the marks means in the direction it is progressing, what it will be when the marks reach the pump sump at the end of the gallery, and the gallery has no more wall to receive what is being written on it. I am going back tonight. I go back every 3 nights, and I will go back tonight, and I will photograph what has appeared since the last visit, and I will add it to the record that no one else has seen. And I will stand in Gallery 4 at 203 feet below the surface of Wisconsin, and I will put my hand on the limestone and feel what is on the other side of it, and the record will grow. And I am aware that the record growing is what the marks being written is, that I am the record. That the thing on the other side of the Gallery 4 east wall is writing into the rock between it and me with the slow patience of something that has been in this limestone since before there was a tunnel to access it from, and that the writing is addressed to the person who keeps coming back to read it, and that I am that person, and that the writing is not finished, and that when it is finished I will know, because the marks will stop, and the stopping will mean that what needed to be said has been said. And I will stand in Gallery 4 with 43 photographs, and whatever comes after them, and I will have to decide what the record means and what to do with the meaning. And I do not know yet, and I go back tonight, and I will know more than I know now, and I am not sure that knowing more is the same as being prepared. Story number 3. The loader I am operating in the Gallatin limestone quarry at 3:41 in the morning is a Caterpillar 988K with an operating weight of 88,000 pounds and a bucket capacity of 12 cubic yards. And when it moves through the cavern, it fills the cavern with a sound that is not like any sound on the surface, because the cavern takes the engine sound and does what enclosed limestone spaces do with sound, which is multiply it, reflect it from every surface, return it from the ceiling and the walls and the floor simultaneously, so that the engine of an 88,000-pound machine in a cavern of this dimension becomes a sound that is felt in the chest and in the teeth and in the bones before it is heard with the ears, a sound that takes up all the acoustic space of the cavern the way the machine takes up all the visual space, and in which the distinguishing of any other sound from the engine sound becomes essentially impossible, which is the condition I am in at 3:41 in the morning, when I begin to suspect that there is something in the cavern with me that the engine sound is covering, that I am catching in the instants between gear changes, in the brief reductions in engine load as the transmission shifts, in the fractional acoustic gaps that the machine produces as it transitions between operating states, and that is using those gaps the way something uses the pauses between the bars of a piece of music, filling them, present in them, gone again when the music returns, and the music of an 88,000-pound loader in a limestone cavern never stops for long enough to hear it clearly, which may be intentional, which is the thought that I have not been able to dislodge since 3:41 this morning, and that I am still sitting with at the end of my shift. The Gallatin limestone quarry operation is an underground quarrying operation in Sumner County, Tennessee, extracting limestone from a deposit that was determined to be more efficiently accessed from below than from the surface, which is the determination that produces underground quarrying operations in place of open-pit operations when the deposit geometry and the surface land use conditions favor it. The quarry has been operating for 18 years and has developed, over those 18 years, an extensive underground working area of multiple levels connected by ramps and haul roads, with active extraction faces at the lowest current level, and a network of developed caverns and passages at the upper levels that range from active haulage routes to worked-out voids that have been allowed to stabilize, and that are not trafficked by equipment, but that are accessible, which is the characteristic of worked-out limestone voids that matters most for what I am going to tell you, which is that accessible means not sealed, means open to whatever uses accessible underground spaces at 3:41 in the morning in a quarry in Sumner County, Tennessee. I have been an underground equipment operator at this quarry for 4 years, working the night shift, which is the shift that runs the haulage cycle during the hours when the blasting crews are not active. When the development crews have finished their shift, when the underground is populated primarily by equipment operators moving broken rock from the production faces to the crusher feed point and back. A continuous cycle of load and haul and dump that in a working quarry does not stop, because the quarry does not stop, because limestone is a commodity with a continuous demand, and the quarry operates against that demand around the clock. The night shift is quieter than the day shift in the sense of reduced crew size and reduced activity diversity, but it is not quiet in the sense of the machine operation, which is the dominant sensory fact of the underground at all hours, the sound and the vibration and the exhaust, and the light of heavy equipment moving through enclosed spaces. The cavern I am working in at 341 is the main level 3 extraction chamber, a space that has been developed by quarrying to a dimension of approximately 200 feet in length and 80 feet in width, with a ceiling height of approximately 45 feet, the ceiling being the remaining rock above the extracted zone that has been determined by the engineering assessment to be of sufficient thickness and integrity to be left in place as the permanent roof of this chamber. The ceiling is not uniform. Limestone quarrying produces a ceiling with the character of the deposit, which in Gallatin's geology means a ceiling with irregular surface features, natural fractures along bedding planes, occasional solution cavities that have been intersected by the extraction, and that appear as voids of varying size in the ceiling surface, some small, some large enough to be significant, all assessed and monitored by the geotechnical team, all either backfilled or deemed stable based on their assessment. The ceiling in the main level 3 chamber is 45 feet above the loader cab, and I am operating under it at 341. And the ceiling is the place I am not looking because the loader operator in a production cycle looks at the floor and the face and the bucket and the haul road, not at the ceiling. And not looking at the ceiling is the professional habit of a person who has internalized the assessment that the ceiling is safe. And I have internalized that assessment. And at 341, I am not looking at the ceiling. The gap I hear is at 341, and it is at a gear transition, the brief acoustic reduction as the transmission shifts from second to third on the haul road grade. And in the gap, there is a sound that is not the engine and is not the transmission and is not the tires on the rock floor and is not the fan or the hydraulics or any of the mechanical systems of the loader. It is above me. It is from the ceiling. It is a single sound, brief, lasting less than the gear transition gap, and it has the character of a large weight shifting its position on a surface, the sound of something very heavy repositioning on a ledge or a surface above me. And the gap closes, and the engine is at full note again, and I am in the loader cab under 45 feet of limestone ceiling, and the instinct that has produced the hair behavior at the back of my neck is already operational by the time the conscious assessment of what I heard catches up. I complete the haul cycle. I dump at the crusher feed. I return to the production face for the next load. In the return, I am listening in the gear transition gaps with a specific attention that I have not previously directed at the ceiling of this cavern. And in the second gear transition gap, I hear it again, different position in the cavern, from above and to the right of the cab this time rather than directly above, a repositioning sound from the ceiling 45 feet up. And the repositioning is in the direction I am traveling, which is toward the production face at the south end of the chamber. And the repositioning is keeping pace with the loader, which is the detail that moves the assessment from falling rock, which would be the correct geotechnical explanation for a ceiling sound in a limestone quarry, and which I have heard and know the character of. Falling rock does not reposition, does not track the loader across the chamber, does not produce the specific sound of something very heavy shifting its weight with deliberate care. I look up. This is the violation of the habit I described, the looking up that 4 years of underground equipment operation has trained me not to do during a production cycle. And I look up because what I am hearing from the ceiling has produced a necessity in me that overrides the habit. The headlamps of the loader illuminate the chamber to a height of approximately 30 feet from the cab, which is 15 feet short of the ceiling, which is lit by the string lighting of the chamber's permanent installation. And the permanent lighting at 45 feet is not the lighting of a surface work environment, is the dim industrial lighting of a large underground space in which the ceiling is visible in the way that the ceiling of a cathedral is visible from the nave floor. Visible in the sense of existing and being discernible, but not in the sense of being clearly detailed. And I am looking at the ceiling from the loader cab on the Hall Road, and I can see the ceiling, and I can see the solution cavities in the ceiling, and I can see the surface of the ceiling in the dim permanent lighting. And in one of the solution cavities, in one of the voids that the geotechnical assessment has assessed and deemed either backfilled or stable, something is looking back at me. I use that phrase deliberately, and with the understanding that it is the phrase that my experience of the moment produces, and that the phrase requires explanation to be received correctly. I am not saying I see a face in the ceiling. I am not saying I see a figure in the ceiling. I am saying that in the solution cavity at the roughly 11 o'clock position from the cab, in the void in the limestone ceiling 45 feet above me, the quality of the darkness in the void is different from the darkness in the other voids, different in the specific way that the darkness of an occupied space is different from the darkness of an unoccupied space. The way the darkness behind a window with someone standing at it is different from the darkness behind an empty window. And the quality of difference is directed, is oriented toward the cab, is the quality of attention, and I am in the loader cab under 45 feet of limestone and something in the ceiling is attending to me. I look forward. I complete the load cycle. I load the bucket from the production face. I turn on the Hall Road. I accelerate toward the crusher feed. In the gear transition gaps I hear the repositioning twice more, tracking above me, and I do not look up again. And I dump at the crusher and I radio my foreman, a man named Darrell who has been underground at Gallatin for 16 years, and I tell him I am hearing ceiling movement in the level 3 main chamber and requesting a geotechnical check before I continue the cycle. Darrell comes on in 3 seconds and says, "What kind of ceiling movement?" I describe what I heard, the repositioning character, the tracking quality. There is a pause. Darrell says, "We're in the chamber." I tell him, 11 o'clock from the Hall Road Center mid-span. Another pause. Darrell says, "I am calling a cycle pause and I am coming to your position." Darrell arrives at the level 3 main chamber in 12 minutes in a personnel carrier, and he gets out, and he stands in the chamber with a high-powered torch, and he lights the ceiling at the 11 o'clock position, and he holds the light there for a long time, and I am beside him looking up, and the solution cavity at the 11 o'clock position is dark and still, and shows nothing in Darrell's torch, and Darrell holds the light there for a long time and says nothing. And then he moves the torch to the adjacent voids and holds each one and says nothing. And then he lowers the torch and he looks at me and he says, "How many cycles have you run tonight?" I say 6. He says, "Go home." I say the shift has 3 hours. He says, "Log a cycle completion for fatigue management. I will cover your machine for the remainder. Go home." I say, "What's in the ceiling?" He looks at the ceiling. He looks at the 11 o'clock void. He says the geotechnical assessment on that void was stable, no fill required, no void connection to upper levels. I say, what does that mean? He says, it means the assessment says nothing should be in there. I say, and he looks at me for a long moment. He says, go home and get some sleep and come back tomorrow night, and the ceiling will be what it is, and the assessment will say what it says, and you will run your cycles, and the quarry will produce what it produces. He says this in the tone of a man delivering a statement he has delivered before, and that he does not fully endorse, and that he is delivering because it is the statement available, and because the statement that is not available, the one that would address what I actually heard and saw, is not something that fits in a shift log or a geotechnical assessment or a cycle completion form or any of the documentation that a functioning underground quarry operation requires its supervisors to produce and file. I go home, I sleep badly. I come back the following night and I run my cycles, and the ceiling is the ceiling, and the engine fills the chamber with its reflected thunder, and in the gear transition gaps I listen, and I hear nothing, and the 11 o'clock void is dark and still in Darrell's torch when he sweeps it at the beginning of the shift, as he has swept it every night since the night I called the cycle pause, as he will sweep it every night for as long as I work this quarry, because Darrell knows what to check and when to check it. And that knowledge is the knowledge of 16 years underground at Gallatin. And it is the knowledge of what is in the ceiling and where it goes when the light finds it, and when it comes back when the light is gone. And he has never told me, and I have never asked. And we run the cycles, and the quarry produces what it produces, and the ceiling is 45 feet above the cab, and I do not look up. And the engine fills the chamber with its thunder, and in the gaps, in the brief acoustic spaces between the bars of the music, I listen, and most nights there is nothing, and on some nights there is the sound of something very large and very careful repositioning its weight on the limestone 45 feet above me, and I do not look up, and I keep driving, and the quarry does not stop, and the thing in the ceiling does not stop, and we have reached an understanding, the thing and I, the understanding of the gear gap and the repositioning sound and the not looking up. The understanding of a person and whatever shares the chamber with them doing the work, the chamber requires each of them to do and maintaining between them, the specific silence of things that have agreed not to examine each other too closely. And that is enough. And that is the job, and I go back every night, and the engine roars, and the limestone gives up what it gives up, and the ceiling keeps what it keeps.